This is Lesson 6, Painting a Watercolour Portrait, Part 2, Hair and Clothing. So I've already put a wash on the hair. It's a very thin, light wash of tea consistency. And I use yellow ochre paint and with a little bit of Payne's grey. I'm putting on the second wash now and going a little bit darker, so more like a coffee consistency. So I'd encourage you, though you might not think of using something like a Payne's grey, I'd encourage you to experiment with colours and perhaps putting a cooler colour into what you think is, you think it's blonde hair. So this boy has sort of a mid-blonde hair, mid to dark blonde. And so you might not think that something like Payne's grey would actually give a realistic colour, but it does. So it is actually a realistic colour of hair, unlike the skin isn't quite realistic. But so with this second wash, I'm making sure to avoid the areas that are highlight in the hair. So that's where the light reflects off the hair. And going in now with a third wash, or you could call it a second wash still. I'm painting wet on wet, so I'm going in a little bit darker. I'm using now with this layer burnt umber with yellow ochre and Payne's grey. I'm still using quite a large brush, so it might be about a size 8 that I'm using here. And you can, it's useful still because this round brush has a pointed tip on it, so you can vary the effects you get a little bit. But I'm still working in generalities at the moment rather than getting into lots of detail yet with the hair. So I'm using a clean cloth there to dab off the paint as it approaches where the highlighted area should be. So the cloth can be a quick way to blend. You're sort of lifting off some of that paint. Now I'm getting a bit more specific with some of the lines, and they are darker. I'm using the point of the brush for this. You can use even a smaller brush for this stage. So as before, in previous videos that I've spoken about, moving from a tea wash to a butter wash. So as I'm putting down the washes and the layers, the paint is getting thicker, so the mixture is thicker, and I'm also going from light to dark. So the first wash I put it down all over the hair, so that sits on the highlights, and then over the highlights it gets darker each time. I'm trying to bring in a lot more contrast now with this layer, so I let that third layer dry. You can use the hairdryer, and if you do use a hairdryer, use it on a cool setting and let the page return to room temperature before you start to paint your next layer. So yeah, getting this layer is a lot thicker. You might say it's maybe a milk consistency or even cream. I'm trying to work in that blending, so you can blend outwards with water as well. So let's say you put down a bit of paint and then clean off and dry off your brush, and you don't need to dry off your brush, but clean it off and then just use a little bit of water on your brush to blend that pigment outwards towards the highlighted area. So you want it to sort of not quickly jump from dark to light. You want it to be sort of diffused from the darker areas. So already now there's a lot more contrast in the hair. You see there's darker areas, you have your highlight maintained, and there's mid-tones. So I'll try and get down a little bit more specific information now. And something like hair can be quite confusing, I think, for some people to paint or draw, because there's a lot going on. There's a lot of tones and the ways in which the hair flows. So I would suggest keeping your palette fairly simple. So I'm really just using those three colours that I showed you there. I'm working within that, and that will make the hair look like it all belongs on the same head, and it's not two different hair colours or heads of hair. So I'm using the burnt umber, the Payne's grey and the yellow ochre. And then even take it section by section. So look at the left hand side of the head and really observe, and just take your time and build it up. So, but of course, with watercolour and with all painting really and drawing, you're moving from the general to the specific. So you sort of at this stage, from here on out, or even before now, just a bit before now, you really want to be observing, and you're becoming more specific with your detail. So I will move on to the jumper shortly. I'm going to do a little bit more painting here with the hair, and then move on to the jumper, and then go back to the hair. So I'll let the hair dry naturally, and it's good for the hair, and then go on to the jumper, do the first layer there, let that dry, go back to the hair, go back to the jumper. So I have a much finer brush now, and it's got a nice tip as well. It's a round brush with a sort of pointed end. So something like maybe a size 4 would be useful here, size 3 maybe. I'm going a lot darker, getting in the shaded areas. There are shaded areas in hair. That's because hair sits on top. Let's say we're thinking about it in terms of locks. Locks of hair sit on top of other locks of hair. So you might see little peeps of the hair below, and that hair is going to be shaded by the hair that's sitting on top. So we do need a variance of tone within a head of hair to make it look realistic. So yeah, observation is key, really, really important, and it will help if you're not overwhelming yourself and you're just looking at section by section at a time. And take your time, so patience as well, as you know, is very important. So still trying to maintain, while putting in the information, trying to maintain the highlights where they are. If I do make a mistake, I can go back with maybe the white paint straight from the tube might help to lighten up an area, but we try to work it this way, build it from light to dark. I'm getting in some more browny or mid-tones there, so I don't keep the paint combinations static. So sometimes certain areas look more brown, so I'll put in a bit more burnt umber. Certain areas look darker, I'll put in more Payne's grey. Or if, even at this stage, if I see some lighter areas, put more water into your mixture to lighten areas up. So I'm trying to get in some fine detail now with strands of hair. Curve and movement of hair is important as well, that it's not all in the one direction, it looks naturalistic, and the only way to achieve that, there is no trick, it's just observation. For my jumper, it's a pretty similar kind of palette that I'm using. I'm using a yellow, because it's a lemon yellow jumper. I'm using Payne's grey as well, and I'm using burnt umber. But I'm using a I'm not using yellow ochre, sorry. I would use lemon yellow if I had it, but because I don't, I have cadmium yellow and I have white, and so I'm going to mix those two together to get that lemon yellow. And then for the shade, I'm mixing the burnt umber with the yellow and the Payne's grey. So I'm moving back to the hair and you just can flip between. That's the handy thing as well, you know, you can let one area dry and go back to another area. So I'm enhancing some of the darker hair that needs to be around the ear. There's a lot of shade often around the ear. And then there are some, I'll get to some nice little flyaway strands at the front of the hair. Of course, this paint colour is perfect as well for the eyelashes. The eyelashes are quite dark looking, so I'm just enhancing them a little bit there while I have the colour to hand. Okay, getting in those flyaway hairs now at the front. So really fine brush for this part. You could use a 00 or a 0000. So a really fine brush, and use the tip of the brush for the flyaway hairs. And just kind of look at, again, keep your eye on what tone, what colours these hairs are, whether they're quite light. In that case, just make your paint a bit more watery, or whether they're quite dark. There'll be varying tones, so that'll help to make it look more naturalistic, to vary the tones as they are. So though that skin was looking very, perhaps not quite naturalistic, now with the addition of the hair and the colour on the jumper, it's really looking a lot better, I think, you know, and with the colour of the eyes as well. But it really, the skin isn't completely realistic at all. It's much warmer in reality. So I'm going back into the jumper now and putting in some shade, and just a reminder, the shade colour is, so I have if you have lemon yellow, I have cadmium yellow and white, and then into that mixture you're adding in burnt umber and a bit of Payne's grey, and that's going to give you your shade tone. It'll look like sort of a greeny brown colour. So I'm sitting that under the chin, and then in the ribs and in the folds of the jumper. I'm going to have to do a couple more layers on that to make it look more realistic. I get this painting to a particular stage today. It looks fairly finished, so I'm going to leave it there with you for today in terms of where it's at. But for me, I'd probably ideally like to go back to it with at least one more layer and a little bit of tinkering in the hair, and definitely in the jumper as well. The sort of the strokes I'm using for the ribbing, the shape of them are curved and a little bit bubbly, so that's a bit of a tip there for the clothing. So yeah, I'm going to leave it at where it's at right now in terms of being a somewhat finished piece. It looks quite finished, so if you can get to that stage, that would be amazing. And if I do end up recording any more of what I finish, when I finish it soon, I will post that as well. So thanks very much. Speak to you soon. Bye.